Mr. Andrew insulted me in front of the graduating students during the orientation ceremony of S-Systems. He said, "An incompetent old man is a disgrace to the company." I couldn't believe I was being insulted in such a place. The painful stares made me feel miserable. Why do I have to be called an incompetent old man in such a setting? I'm still in my 30s. I don't have to take this from 50-year-old Mr. Andrew. I've endured a lot of harassment from him up until now, but after being treated like this, I've finally had enough. I'm going to leave this company behind. I disappeared from the buzzing hall, and later, I was called in early in the morning by the CEO and Mr. Andrew. They looked pale and clung to me. "What are we going to do, Thomas? You really did it this time." They were shifting the blame, not realizing this was just the beginning of the collapse. "My name is Thomas. I work at S-Systems, a company that develops systems. I've worked in sales for many years and recently got promoted to manager, but that promotion was due to a lack of staff. Lately, a lot of people have been quitting S-Systems. I think it's because of the newly appointed executive director, Mr. Andrew, the CEO's nephew. He's also been with S-Systems for many years and was appointed executive director last year. However, Mr. Andrew is not a very serious person. Despite being frequently late, he shows no sign of remorse. He loves to chat and constantly interrupts other employees. He's a troublesome person who only imposes outdated values. His lack of expertise in systems caused significant backlash among the employees when he became the executive director. Many talented people left, and I was promoted to fill the gap. However, my salary remained the same while my responsibilities increased, leaving me with nothing good. The only reason I didn't quit was because I had no prospects for my next job and lacked the courage to leave. I have a precious wife who is currently pregnant, and I didn't want to worry her before the birth of our child. To ensure a stable life for our soon-to-be-born child, staying at this job was my best option for now. Amidst the situation, I continued my work in sales. Honestly, I'm not suited for sales. I'm not very talkative or cheerful. I'm more inclined to work quietly. If there weren't a shortage of personnel, I wouldn't have become the sales manager. Even today, someone approached me. It was Mr. Andrew. Since becoming the executive director, he seems to have too much free time and often visits various departments. He claims it's to inspect the company, but I think he does it too frequently. "Hey, Thomas, still looking old as usual today. Please, Mr. Andrew, stop that." He often teases me about looking old. His childish teasing is tiring when it happens repeatedly. Mr. Andrew, who looks young for his age, often talks to me to feel superior. "Thomas, I heard the sales for this month are terrible." I'm sorry, can you really call yourself a manager like this? It's a problem if you're just a salary thief, I thought to myself. They don't pay me enough anyway. Being belittled in front of indifferent subordinates, I just looked down in shame. His nagging continued for 30 minutes, making me significantly late for my fieldwork that afternoon. I was working overtime to make up for the delay in my outside rounds when I heard the sound of someone running around frantically. Wondering what was going on, I went to check and saw Frank from the system development department in a panic in front of his computer. "Frank, what's going on?" "Oh, Mr. Thomason, actually, it seems Mr. Andrew accessed a suspicious website. There's an error in the system that's due for delivery." After hearing the details from Frank, it turned out that Mr. Andrew had accessed an inappropriate site on a company computer and picked up a virus. What on earth was he doing at work? I couldn't help but be astonished. However, this was a serious matter. I took off my jacket and immediately started helping him. The system that had crashed was supposed to be delivered to one of my clients tomorrow. Frank and I worked together to fix it. We finally finished late at night. I had called my wife, but she was probably so worried she had fallen asleep. "It's done. Thank you, Mr. Thomason. Thank goodness you helped me too." "Thanks, but Mr. Thomason, I didn't know you had such technical skills. Your programming knowledge is impressive. Why are you in sales?" I chuckled at a sincere question. Indeed, I had knowledge and skills related to systems. One of the reasons was the influence of my former seniors who had now left the company. If it weren't for them, I might have neglected to hone these skills. They encouraged me. Even in sales, knowledge of the systems was crucial, so I continued practical studies in system development and programming. Even in my personal life, I enjoy creating apps and I still have extensive knowledge and skills. It even became a way to earn a little extra money and a means of relaxation. Hearing this, Frank laughed and said, "From now on, I can rely on you, Mr. Thomason. Please don't. I can't work any more than this." That's true. Mr. Andrews' harassment is terrible, isn't it? It seems that people from other departments also know about you and Mr. Andrew. As we were talking about this, Mr. Andrew came in at the worst possible moment. You guys are still at it. Well, is it done? The person responsible for this mess was somehow yelling at us arrogantly. Yes. For goodness sake, you need to learn to finish quicker. I missed the last train because of this. He probably couldn't go home without seeing the result of his own mess. Mr. Andrew took out a plastic bag and quietly said to me and Frank, "Well, let's keep this quiet." In the plastic bag he held out, there were 2 puddings from a convenience store. He was saying to let this go in exchange for 2 puddings. This is something that should be reported and it's a matter that should be brought up in a meeting. Mr. Andrew, we can't just let this go. This should be brought to the board meeting, I insisted. At my words, Mr. Andrew glared at me sharply. You idiot! If you do that, what do you think will happen to my position? This can be settled if you guys keep quiet. But Thomas, you seem to be mistaken about something. Who do you think is the boss here, huh? He then targeted my weakness. If you quit now, your wife will be out on the streets. She won't be able to safely give birth to your child. Listen, Thomas, if you have a family, be smart. He said this while patting my shoulder, implicitly threatening that I would be fired if I revealed this. Mr. Andrew, that's terrible. We're not even going to get paid for today's overtime, Frank said weakly as he watched Mr. Andrew leave. This is nothing new, I sighed deeply. However, I would later realize that Mr. Andrews' harassment wouldn't stop there. In October, we were to hold a ceremony for the new graduates. Since we had 88 new hires, we reserved a banquet hall at a nearby hotel for the ceremony. All department heads and above were required to attend the orientation ceremony. Of course, I was included, and as a result, I was roped into the preparations. The day before, Mr. Andrew ordered me to prepare and transport the souvenirs for the new hires. This task should have been handled by the General Affairs Department, but he forced it on me as part of his harassment. Since that system error incident, his harassment had gotten worse. Maybe he thought he was training me not to rebel. It was a nuisance, and I was drenched in sweat while carrying the luggage. When I entered the hotel, I saw that another group was preparing in the room next to our system orientation venue. Apparently, the adjacent room was also hosting an orientation ceremony. I was surprised to see the sign saying our corporation orientation. Our corporation is a system company that's becoming our competitor, even though they've only been around for about 10 years and are still relatively small. I had been somewhat interested in them, and I was impressed to see that our corporation had grown enough to hold their orientation at a hotel. A flustered middle-aged man came out of their room. Look, I don't know. Can't you send at least one person over here? He said into his phone, wiping sweat from his forehead. From his conversation, it seemed they were experiencing a system error with their laptops. The man preparing the venue didn't seem to have much knowledge about the system and was clearly troubled. I couldn't help but offer my help. Excuse me, would you like me to take a look? Oh, could you? Yes, please, he replied. The error was simple, and I was able to fix it quickly. The middle-aged man looked relieved and smiled, offering a handshake. As we chatted for a while, I heard heavy, unpleasant footsteps approaching from behind. Thomas, are you done with the preparations? Yes, of course, I replied calmly. But Mr. Andrews' eyes fell on the middle-aged man from our corporation, seeing the sign on the door. He rudely stared at the man. Our corporation, huh? So, you're holding your orientation next to ours, imitating us? How bold, Mr. Andrew. That's rude. I tried to stop him from speaking further. I couldn't believe he would be so disrespectful even to people outside our company. However, the middle-aged man laughed cheerfully. He was a great help. You have a fine employee in his system. Of course, I trained him myself. I had no recollection of being trained by Mr. Andrew. Not wanting to stir up trouble, I kept my mouth shut. After the middle-aged man nodded and returned to his room, Mr. Andrew predictably started scolding me again. Helping a rival company, Thomas? Do you think you're in a position to do that, or are you a spy? That's not true. I was just helping. With that attitude, the new graduates will surpass you in no time. You already look older than your age, so you can't compete with their freshness. And so, his grumbling lecture began. Even though the preparations for the venue were finished, my return home would be delayed once again. My wife, who was now heavily pregnant, looked worried and said, "You're late again. If something happens to me, will you be able to come right away?" It pained me to see her worried like that. Then came the day of the orientation ceremony. The ceremony itself proceeded smoothly, and the venue was filled with a festive mood. The atmosphere was great, as expected from choosing the hotel banquet hall. Now it was time for socializing, and everyone seemed relieved. However, a few people got carried away by the atmosphere. The CEO and Mr. Andrew started drinking wine, even though there was a second part to the event. Mr. Andrew was scheduled to give a speech to the new graduates at the end of the ceremony. I couldn't help but feel worried, even though it wasn't my responsibility. And my worries were spot on. When Mr. Andrew took the stage, his face was as red as a tomato. "Ah, today is a wonderful day, and we thank you all for coming." Hey, that's what you say at a wedding." Mr. Andrew laughed as the CEO interrupted him from the corner of the room. The new graduates saw it as a cute comedy act by the old guys, and the room was filled with warm chuckles. However, I had a bad feeling about this. There was no way that the nasty Mr. Andrew would end it with just warm laughs. "Ah, the 88 of you gathered here, you are truly outstanding. That's why you're here. I want you to work hard from now on and become a threat to your colleagues." Mr. Andrew was slightly slurring his words, and the content of his speech gradually became more questionable. "I want you to take pride. We should have gathered talented people like you from the beginning, but now there are too many incompetents." Then he sharply pointed his finger, and who was he pointing at? It was me. "Listen up, Thomas. You should learn from these new hires. An incompetent old man like you is a disgrace to the company." The new hires looked shocked, their eyes wide with surprise. "Huh?" I couldn't help but let out a sound of disbelief. The room began to buzz, and suddenly all eyes were on me, a mere employee. Even as I stood there, unsure how to react, Mr. Andrew's mouth kept running. "He is the sales manager, but he's completely useless. So, from among you outstanding individuals, the next manager might be born. Push aside the incompetent old man and grow rapidly." My head started to ache. If only I could faint. The new hires were unsure whether to laugh or not, and the room was filled with ambiguous murmurs. From somewhere within the buzz, I heard a confused voice say, "Is he okay?" It wasn't clear if they meant Mr. Andrew or me. The murmurs grew louder, but Mr. Andrew took it as a positive reaction and continued his incoherent speech with laughter. The host from the General Affairs Department hastily ended the talk, but I fled the room. When I got home early that day, my wife looked worried. Wasn't there supposed to be a dinner after the orientation ceremony? It got canceled. Anyway, we need to talk. I told my wife about what had happened and our future plans. It was tough to talk about it with her due date approaching, but she took it with a smile. "I've been thinking you should do that for a while now." Her cheerful response was a relief. The next morning, I got a call on my phone very early. I hadn't wanted to think about work last night, so I went to bed early without watching TV or checking my phone. Waking up early wasn't a problem, but I was surprised to see who was calling. It was Mr. Andrew. "Just get here quickly," he said, as self-centered as ever. However, I had things I wanted to say too, so I got ready and went to the office. Since it was before working hours, the office was empty. I entered the quiet CEO's office. Waiting inside were the CEO, looking pale, and Mr. Andrew. Seeing the news on the train ride in, I understood the situation and calmly spoke up. "Things have really gotten out of hand, haven't they, Mr. Andrew?" The two of them, trembling with anxiety, shouted back, "What are we supposed to do now, Thomas? You've really done it now." "They're the ones who messed up, not me," I sighed and responded curtly. "I don't know." Yesterday, shortly after the ceremony, footage of the orientation was posted on social media. It spread rapidly and caused a huge backlash, even making it into online news. Apparently, one of the new hires had secretly filmed Mr. Andrew's antics. The video, accompanied by the caption "This company is a disaster, I'm withdrawing," quickly went viral. Although the faces of Mr. Andrew and mine were blurred out, the company's name was well known. Judging by the intensity of the backlash, it would likely be covered on today's daytime talk shows. Because of that post, more than half of the new hires have withdrawn their acceptance, and there could be more to come, the CEO lamented. But I saw it differently. It's not because of the post. Anyone who heard that speech would naturally be worried about joining the company. "And I'm done with this place too." "What?" Mr. Andrew exclaimed. "See you, Mr. Andrew. Please accept my resignation letter." I handed over an envelope. It was the resignation letter I had written yesterday. Yes, I had finally made up my mind. I no longer wanted to be part of this company. Mr. Andrew's speech had been the final straw. "Don't be ridiculous. We're in the middle of a crisis, and you're saying this now?" Mr. Andrew exclaimed. "You sowed the seeds, Mr. Andrew." "I don't want to work here anymore," I replied as I handed in my resignation. Mr. Andrew shouted in anger, "You won't survive anywhere else. You're an incompetent who can't even achieve decent sales results." His words hit a nerve, and I responded firmly, "My next job will appreciate my abilities properly. Goodbye." "What abilities?" "Hey, Thomas." "Thomas," he called after me, but I ignored him. I left the CEO's office, packed my things, and walked out of the company. I felt an incredible sense of relief, wondering why I hadn't done this sooner. Then, I made a phone call on my smartphone. The call was to R&R Corporation, the rival company that had hosted their orientation next to ours. Yesterday, after the disastrous ceremony, when I couldn't bear to stay any longer and left the venue, I encountered the middle-aged man from R&R Corporation. Their orientation had already finished, but the man had overheard the commotion from our side and had peeked in. Embarrassed, I scratched my head as he reintroduced himself. His name was William, and to my surprise, he was the CEO of R&R Corporation. That executive really made a mess of things. "Look at this," William said, showing me a video of Mr. Andrew's harassment from earlier. Apparently, one of the new hires had posted it. Despite being only a few minutes old, the video was rapidly gaining views. I realized it was only a matter of time before it went viral. There's nothing that can be done. "I'm seriously thinking about quitting this company," I said. Mr. Williams smiled warmly at me. "In that case, why not join us? We still need people who are knowledgeable about systems, and I appreciate someone who can help others in need, like you did earlier. If you're interested, of course." His words were exactly what I needed to hear. It was a godsend. I had made up my mind to leave the company, and I immediately discussed it with my wife when I got home. She smiled with relief and said, "I hope you can find a job you enjoy at the next company." "Enjoy, huh?" "Yeah, that would be nice," I replied. Come to think of it, I hadn't found my work enjoyable since Mr. Andrew took over. Encouraged by my wife's words, I wrote my resignation letter and went to bed early. I started working at R&R Corporation, and although it was a fresh start, the company's atmosphere was great, making it a very comfortable place to work. Moreover, I was assigned to the system development department instead of sales. I was finally able to work in system operations, something I had always dreamed of, and I was thriving in my new role. I felt like I had finally found the kind of job that my wife had hoped would bring me joy. "I'm glad we placed you in this department," the CEO said, and everything was going smoothly. About 3 months after I joined the company, I received a call from an old acquaintance. It was Frank, who was still working hard at his system. Wondering what was going on, I answered immediately, and he told me something astonishing. "Mr. Thomason, it's a disaster. Mr. Andrew is heading over to your place." "Heading over? Why?" "He's accusing our corporation of posting that video." I tried to stop him, but he brushed me off. Not wanting him to cause a scene at the office, I hurried to the entrance. Accusing our corporation of posting that video was a ridiculous claim. The poster had used a throwaway account, so we couldn't identify which new hire had posted it. But anyone could see that resigning after such a speech was understandable, something Mr. Andrew still didn't get. As I stepped outside, I saw Mr. Andrew walking toward the building. I was relieved to intercept him in time. "Thomas. Just the person I wanted to see. I'm going to sue your company for defamation." "What are you talking about? Our company didn't post that video." "Our company, Thomas? Have you fully immersed yourself in R&R Corporation?" "Immersed or not, I am now an employee here." However, Mr. Andrew didn't seem to understand and still spoke to me like he was my superior. "Thomas, listen. Return to S system immediately." "Why should I?" "You said I was incompetent. I didn't know you were so skilled in systems. I'll make you the head of the system development department. It's a great offer." I was amazed he could say such things. There was no way I was going back to S system. When I said as much, Mr. Andrews' face turned red with anger. "The only reason you know anything about systems is because you learned from your seniors at S system. Betraying us by working at R&R Corporation is unacceptable." At that moment, CEO William appeared. He was always talented. Overlooking that and putting him in sales was S system's mistake. "What?" I learned this from him later. Mr. William began explaining to Mr. Andrew the parts of my past he didn't know. In high school, I had won a prize in a programming contest. My interest in system architecture and programming led me to join S System, a systems company. However, I was inexplicably placed in sales. S System had this inexplicable rule that all new employees had to start in sales, and I ended up stuck in the sales department. My complaints fell on deaf ears because S System's HR evaluations and interviews were inadequate. My enthusiasm was gradually eroded. Even so, I managed to hang on for a while, thanks to a few respected colleagues who encouraged me. I continued to study the constantly evolving systems and maintain my technical skills. However, it was ultimately Mr. Andrews' behavior that pushed me to resign. A programming contest prize? I never heard about that. It wasn't an environment where such achievements were acknowledged. Besides, I had no desire to showcase my abilities to a company that labeled me as incompetent. When I said this firmly, Mr. Andrew gritted his teeth in frustration. "Just you wait," he snarled, delivering a dramatic parting line that made me smile wryly. It seemed he had given up. I contacted Frank, who sounded relieved when he picked up. "That's good to hear. Actually, I'm thinking of leaving S System too." Hearing this, I whispered to Mr. William, "Another talented person seems likely to come here." Mr. William smiled warmly and said, "That's the best news we could hope for." A month later, thanks to my recommendation, Frank also transferred to our corporation. S System, having lost such valuable talent in system development, predictably began to falter. Employees started leaving en masse like rats fleeing a sinking ship. S System, already suffering from a manpower shortage, found itself in dire straits and eventually went bankrupt. Where did it all go wrong? Mr. Andrew reportedly shouted, but it was clear that his appointment as an executive was the turning point. He had been arrogant because he was the CEO's relative but lacked the necessary skills. With no place left to stay, Mr. Andrew's search for a new job proved extremely difficult. Even though his face was blurred in the infamous viral video, those in the industry could still recognize him. The company's name being mentioned only made things worse. Mr. Andrew, who became notorious in the industry, struggled to find a company willing to hire him. At over 50, he found himself out on the streets. The CEO he had depended on was too busy dealing with the bankruptcy to offer any help, leaving Mr. Andrew completely abandoned. The man who once called me incompetent was now seen as the real failure. Without his executive position, it was a fitting end, a result of his own actions. Rumors circulated about Mr. Andrew. Some said he was collecting cans, others that he was lining up at soup kitchens. But the truth remained unclear. 3 years had passed since my job change. By now, I had fully integrated into our corporation. I came home one day bearing good news. Great news! I've been promoted to assistant manager, along with a raise and benefits. Wow, congratulations, honey, my wife exclaimed. Our son Randy, who had grown so much, came up to us as we celebrated. Dad, you're amazing as a supervisor. Thank you, I replied, lifting Randy up high. When my child was just born, I worked hard to avoid overtime, and my boss, who appreciated my efforts, supported my promotion this time. I'm really glad I switched to our corporation, which properly evaluates work and results. Frank, who transferred with me, recently bragged about getting a girlfriend. I still have the great responsibility of supporting my family. At work, my responsibilities have increased as a supervisor.